All right, number two. So that was the first reason why we might see wage differentials is compensating differentials, where you get paid more basically to take a job that you don't want as much as some other job. Number two, second way in which we might see wage differentials is labor unions. These can be a source of wage differentials. This can be another way in which wages can differ from just being the price times the marginal productivity of labor. So a labor union is when a large group of workers band together and they basically make working decisions to some degree collectively. They bargain with the employers. They might negotiate with employers for a higher wage or better benefits or whatever it is. For the purposes of this discussion, all the other stuff that labor unions give you, like benefits and like working conditions and stuff, I'm just going to sort of squeeze that all into a wage box. We're going to do the thing where we sort of value whatever those benefits are in some sort of dollar terms. And say that that's part of our wage, right? And so a labor union can explain why workers at one company might make more than workers at another company, even if the workers at both companies are equally skilled. So when there's a labor union, this is basically a form of pricing power. Right? Think about the difference between having a labor union and not having a labor union. Not having a labor union, each individual worker is on an individual contract with the employer. They all have to negotiate individually. And if you try to charge more than the market rate, then the employer is just going to say, no, I'll go hire somebody else, as you would do in a competitive market. But with a labor union in place, everyone is bargaining together. And so if everybody walks in and says, hey, pay us more than the competitive market rate, they can't just say, no, we're going to go hire somebody else because everyone is in the union, right? You can't go hire somebody else because they're all in the union. That's the idea. So when this happens, the labor market is no longer competitive. And what do we think is going to happen? What typically happens when you have pricing power? Well, we expect that the price goes up and also the quantity goes down. So with a labor union in place, we are likely to see higher wages and also lower quantity, as fewer people being actually employed. Like with the minimum wage or other sorts of labor market policies, you would expect the lower quantity would probably translate to some people not being able to work in the unionized job who want them. So it could lead to some unemployment or people being shifted to lower quality jobs, which is the downside. There's going to be some inefficiency, but there's all unemployment, but you also get higher wages, which is the goal, right? So labor union is nice for people in the union. It is slightly less nice for people out of the union. That's the goal of the union, right? That's what they're doing. Because labor unions have a form of pricing power, we expect higher wages, right? Because of those higher wages, the employer probably won't hire as many people, but they will hire them at higher wages. I mean, some dead weight loss, but you have to weigh that down, that dead weight loss against the higher wages. That's what we end up with. So pricing power is, as always, pretty nice if you can get it. And this is why we would have a wage differential, right? If you have two companies, one of which is unionized and the other one is not, you would expect that wages would be higher at the unionized company than they would be at the ununionized company, even if skills are identical at the two companies. Sorry about that. So I mentioned the dead weight loss that you would expect employment to go down. That does assume that the labor market was competitive to start with. There are situations in which you would expect that the labor union might actually improve efficiency. Specifically, that happens if the employer is a monopsonist. So this is a term we haven't really brought up before, but monopsony is sort of like monopoly, but for buyers, where there's only one buyer. For example, if you want to work in the automated electric car business, there's not a lot of places you can work, right? There's like two, right? So it's not really a competitive market for electric automated car places, right? So they have some pricing power on the buyer's side, which sort of does the same thing as monopolies, but on the flip side. You would expect that it would lower wages and also employment as well. So if you unionize in a market that has monopsony, where there's concentration in the buyers, then this can actually sort of equalize the price again at that competitive market level because it equalizes the bargaining power between the two sides. I'm not going to go super deep into this, but just as a caveat for the efficiency stuff that we're talking about here. So to sum up what labor unions do in a very brief way, right? We haven't spent a lot of time on this. You could have a whole class on labor unions. But what we'd expect to happen, higher wages, which are good for the workers who are working at the company, not so good for the companies. There's going to be a little bit less employment, which means you can hire better, which is less employment. So there's going to be some people who want to work at the company and who might have been able to work at the company in the absence of the union, and yet the company is going to choose not to hire more people because they're more expensive. This also means you can have pickier employment. So there's sort of a feedback loop here when you're talking about skill. So I mentioned that this is assuming that the unionized and non-unionized workplaces are equally skilled. That probably won't happen for very long, because think about what's going to happen. Imagine you have two workplaces that are equally skilled, one of them unionizing, right? So then this company starts paying more and they start hiring fewer people, which means they can be pickier about who they hire, right? And so if you are on the higher end skill level of this company over here that's not unionized, it's going to be in your interest to go work over here instead. And you're going to be able to find a job because they're being pickier. They got to pay more, so they might as well be pickier about who they hire people who are more skilled. So over time, you'd expect the unionized company to have more skilled employees in it because they are paying more money. So that's where the higher skilled people are going to want to work. So over time, you'd expect to see that, in fact, it's no longer equally skilled anymore. You're probably going to get more skilled workers because you can do pickier employment at the unionized places. It has multiple effects, right? For one thing, it suggests that the dynamics of labor unions would be different if everybody was unionized as opposed to just a few companies, because then that couldn't happen. You also see stuff like, for a long time, Costco's been a really great example of this. Costco pays more than most other companies in the same industry. You tend to see that people who work at Costco work there for longer periods. They tend to be more skilled in that area. And they can do that because they pay more. They can be pickier about who they hire than say Walmart can.